Viewer discretion is advised. This video contains detailed discussion of real historical crimes, disturbing content, and the true events that helped shape one of the most terrifying characters in film history. Some viewers may find the subject matter deeply unsettling. Proceed with caution. Most people believe Leatherface was just a horror movie villain, but the character was inspired by a real killer, and the true story behind him is far stranger than anything the movie ever showed you. There is a detail buried inside the Texas Chainsaw Massacre that most viewers never notice. A detail so psychologically disturbing that once you see it, the character of Leatherface becomes something else entirely. We will get to it. But first, you need to understand where this all began. Because the answer does not start in Texas. It starts in a small farmhouse in Wisconsin. And in a man so quiet, so ordinary looking, that his neighbors let him babysit their children. His name was Ed Gein. And in 1957, when investigators finally stepped inside his home, what they found would go on to haunt American culture for the next 70 years. In the last video on this channel, we explored the disturbing true story of Ed Gein in detail. But his crimes did not just shock the country. They traveled. They mutated. They lodged themselves inside the imagination of a filmmaker from Texas who was looking for something that would make audiences feel genuinely afraid. And what came out of that was Leatherface. Stay with us, because by the end, the way you think about that character will never be the same. In 1974, a low-budget horror film appeared in American theaters. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre was directed by a young filmmaker named Tobe Hooper. The budget was almost nothing. The shoot was brutal. The cast and crew worked in 100-degree Texas heat with no air conditioning and almost no breaks for days on end. And somehow, all of that suffering ended up on screen. Audiences had never seen anything quite like it. The film did not feel like a movie. It felt like something that had been found rather than made. The camera moved like it was operated by someone genuinely terrified. The lighting was wrong in a way that felt unintentional. The editing cut away when you needed to breathe and held on when you desperately needed it to stop. Then there was the marketing. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre was released with a single, devastating line printed across its promotional material. What you are about to see is based on a true story. That sentence did something to audiences that the film itself could not have done alone. People left theaters genuinely uncertain about what they had just witnessed. Was this real? Had this happened? Were these people out there somewhere right now waiting? The answer was complicated. There was no cannibalistic family in Texas. There was no isolated farmhouse where hitchhikers vanished and were never found. Tobe Hooper had not discovered a police report and turned it into a screenplay. What he had done was something far more interesting. He had found Ed Gein. Before Hooper could build Leatherface, he needed the raw material, and Ed Gein provided it in ways that no fictional story could. Edward Theodore Gein was born on August 27, 1906, in La Crosse, Wisconsin. He grew up in the grip of a mother who believed the world outside their farm was rotten with sin. Augusta Gein moved the family to a remote property in Plainfield when Ed was still a child. She cut him off from other children. She preached at him constantly about the wickedness of women, the dangers of the outside world, the certainty of his own weakness. Ed believed every word of it. He had no real friends. He was awkward in a way that other children found unsettling. Giggly at the wrong moments. Distant in a way that suggested he was not quite inside the same world as everyone else. But here is something that rarely gets discussed when people talk about Ed Gein. Augusta did not just control what Ed did. She controlled what Ed thought, what he felt, what he was allowed to want. She read to him from the Bible daily, selecting passages about death, sin, and the depravity of the female body. She told him other women were sinners, every last one of them. That friendship was a trap, that the only pure relationship a man could have was with his mother. She built a cage around him, and then she taught him to call it home. By the time Ed reached adulthood, the outside world was not just unfamiliar to him. It was something he had been trained to fear. His entire emotional architecture had been constructed around one person, one voice, one presence. And when that presence disappeared, everything built around it had nowhere to go. His brother Henry died in 1944 in a brush fire on the Gein property. The official cause was smoke inhalation. Investigators noted unexplained bruising on Henry's body. Nothing was ever proven. 1 year later, Augustus suffered a series of strokes and died. And Ed Gein, at 39 years old, was alone for the first time in his life. What happened next unfolded slowly, invisibly, over years, in the dark. Gein sealed off his mother's bedroom and the parlor she had favored. He kept them exactly as she had left them, untouched, a shrine inside a deteriorating house. The rest of the farmhouse collapsed around those preserved rooms. Garbage piled up. The floors disappeared beneath debris. The windows grew dark. From the outside, Ed Gein looked like a harmless eccentric. Neighbors found him odd but friendly. He did odd jobs around Plainfield. He babysat local children. He was quiet, polite, strange in a way that was easy to dismiss. No one looked closely enough to see what was happening inside. Beginning sometime in the late 1940s, Gein began visiting local cemeteries at night. He would read obituaries and identify recently buried women whose physical descriptions resembled his mother. Then he would return after dark with a shovel. He brought the bodies back to the farm, and in the darkness of that house, he began to do things that investigators in 1957 would spend hours trying to find words for. Bowls made from skulls, chair seats upholstered with human skin, a wastebasket fashioned from a human leg, lampshades, leggings, a vest stitched together from the torso of a woman, complete with breasts, which Ed Gein would put on and wear as he walked the farm at night, and masks. He made masks from the dried, cured skin of human faces. In November of 1957, a hardware store owner named Bernice Worden disappeared from Plainfield. Her son, a deputy sheriff, traced the last entry in the store's register back to Ed Gein. Officers drove out to the farm. What they found took hours to process and years to fully understand. Bernice Worden's body was in a shed on the property, decapitated, hanging from the ceiling, gutted and dressed like a deer. Inside the house, the evidence of years of obsessive, methodical horror covered every surface. Skulls, skin furniture, the vest, soup bowls made from the upper halves of human crania, a refrigerator containing organs. But it was the smell that investigators mentioned most in their reports. A smell that hit you the moment the door swung open. Heavy, sweet, wrong in a way that the human body registers before the mind can name it. Several officers had to step back outside. Some did not go back in. One detective who worked the scene was asked about it decades later in an interview. He said he could still smell it, that it was the kind of thing that does not leave you, that some nights he would wake up and it was just there, in the room with him, as present as it had been in 1957. That is the detail that separates reading about this case from understanding it. The photographs tell you what was there. The smell tells you what it was like to stand in it. Ed Gein was arrested that evening. He confessed freely. 2 confirmed murders, approximately 40 grave robberies, years of manufacturing objects from human remains, all of it unfolding invisibly while an entire town went about its life 50 yards away. He was found mentally incompetent to stand trial in 1958 and committed to the Central State Hospital for the criminally insane. A decade later, found competent, tried, convicted. He died in that institution on July 26, 1984. The farmhouse burned to the ground before it could become a tourist attraction. Now here is where the 2 stories start to overlap. Toby Hooper had been reading about the Gein case in the early 1970s, and instead of trying to recreate what had happened in Wisconsin, he did something different. He took the atmosphere, the isolation, the rot, the farmhouse full of wrong objects, the sense of something living at the absolute edge of ordinary American life, and he amplified it. But it is worth asking why Gein? Because by the early 1970s, there were other true crime cases circulating in the culture. Other killers, other horrors. Hooper did not reach for any of them. What Gein offered that the others did not was domesticity. The horror of the Gein farmhouse was not the horror of a predator stalking a city. It was the horror of a home, of a kitchen, of a dining table, of objects you were supposed to recognize being made from things you were not supposed to recognize. Gein's crimes happened inside the structures of ordinary life, and that is precisely what made them so difficult to process. Hooper understood that the scariest place in a horror film is not a dungeon or a forest or an abandoned factory. It is a house where someone is cooking dinner. The most immediate connection is the mask. Leatherface wears a mask made from human skin. Ed Gein constructed masks from human skin and wore them. That image is so specific, so far outside ordinary horror vocabulary, that it could only have come from one place. The house is the second connection. The Sawyer family home in the film is a place of absolute decay. Furniture assembled from bones. Objects constructed from materials that should not exist as household items. A dining table surrounded by chairs built from human remains. Every surface testifying to something unspeakable. This is the Gein farmhouse, relocated 800 miles south and pushed to its furthest extreme. The third connection is the isolation. The sense that this horror exists out here, away from the roads people travel, in a place where no one is coming. What happened in Plainfield happened because no one was paying attention. The film recreates that geography of abandonment with precision. But the film also did something that changed the source material permanently. It exaggerated it. It made it louder. It gave Ed Gein's quiet, slow, nocturnal horror a body that moved fast and a machine that made noise, and a family of accomplices who lured victims in. Because here is what most people do not realize about Ed Gein. He was not a spree killer. He did not chase anyone with a chainsaw. He was not physically imposing. He was small, cooperative, soft-spoken. His horror was almost entirely silent, almost entirely hidden, almost entirely invisible until the moment investigators walked through his door. Leatherface is everything Ed Gein was not on the surface. Big, loud, relentless, visible. But underneath that difference, something from Plainfield survived the translation intact. And it is the part of the character that most viewers never notice. The real crimes of Ed Gein helped build Leatherface. But the movie pushed everything to an extreme the real story never reached. Two different kinds of darkness, two different kinds of disturbing. So, here is what I want to know from you. Do you find the real story of Ed Gein more disturbing than the fictional version on screen? Or does the film do something to that darkness that makes it even worse? Drop the word chainsaw in the comments right now and tell me which one gets under your skin more. And if you are finding this deep dive into the real history of horror worthwhile, take a second right now to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications. There are many more stories exactly like this one waiting, and you do not want to come back to find you missed them. Now, there is something about Leatherface that most viewers never notice, something that does not announce itself, something that hides inside the film until you start paying close attention. And once you see it, the character becomes significantly more disturbing. Leatherface does not just wear a mask. He wears different masks, and each one changes who he becomes. Watch the film again with this in mind. There is the mask he wears when he is killing, heavy, expressionless, something designed to erase whatever is underneath. But later in the film, inside the house, the mask changes. His behavior changes with it. The enormous, physically terrifying figure that moments ago was swinging a chainsaw is now moving differently, nervous, unsure, almost childlike in the way he interacts with his family. Then there is what the production team called the Pretty Woman mask. Leatherface wears it near the end of the film, along with an apron, while preparing for dinner. It is somehow more disturbing than anything that came before it, not because of what it looks like, but because of what it suggests. He is not wearing masks to hide, he is wearing them to become. Each mask gives him a different identity, a different role, a different way of existing in the world. Without them, there seems to be no one underneath, no stable self, no center. And this is the detail that connects directly back to Ed Gein in a way that no chainsaw ever could. Because Ed did not create his masks as trophies, he wore them. He put them on at night and walked the farm and became something he could not be otherwise. He had spent his entire life being told who he was by a woman who shaped his identity completely, and when she died, that identity collapsed. What was left was a man trying to reconstruct himself from the outside in. wearing other people's faces, stitching together a self from pieces of others. Leatherface, in those quiet moments between the violence, is doing the same thing. Different mask, different person, an identity assembled from fragments because the original was never allowed to form. That psychological thread runs from a cemetery in Plainfield, Wisconsin, all the way to a rotting farmhouse on a Texas road. And it is the reason the character of Leatherface has never quite left the cultural imagination. Because the chainsaw is frightening, but the masks are something else. The masks are a portrait of a person who does not know who they are. And there is something about that that sits differently in the mind than any act of violence ever could. Part of the reason the Texas Chainsaw Massacre achieved what it achieved comes down to filmmaking decisions that were driven almost entirely by desperation rather than craft. The camera work is unsteady in a way that looks accidental because, in many cases, it was. The lighting is harsh and ugly because they could not afford to do better. The editing cuts away at moments when a more controlled film would hold on, and holds on at moments when audiences desperately need relief. The result is a film that does not feel like a story being told to you. It feels like something you stumbled into. Like found footage before found footage was a genre. Like documentary evidence of something that should not exist. The actors were physically miserable during the shoot. The Texas summer heat was real. The exhaustion was real. When someone screams in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it does not always feel like performance. Because in some cases, it was not entirely performance. Gunnar Hansen, the actor who played Leatherface, spoke in later interviews about what it was like inside that house during production. The smell of rotting meat used as set dressing. The layers of costume he could not fully remove between takes. The way the character started to feel less like something he was playing and more like something that was pressing in on him from outside. He said there were moments on set where the line between performance and genuine distress became difficult to locate. That is not a typical interview answer from a horror actor. That is something else. There is almost no traditional score for long stretches of the film. Instead, there is noise, industrial, rhythmic, grinding, the sound of machinery that does not know what it is being used for and would not care if it did. All of it produces a film that sits inside the nervous system differently than most horror movies. It does not frighten you and release you. It frightens you and leaves you there, still in it, still unable to fully locate the line between what was real and what was not. Leatherface did not stay contained to a single film. The character returned in sequels in 1986, 1990, and 1994. Then came a prequel in 2003, a remake that same year, another prequel in 2006, a three-dimensional installment in 2013, a Netflix film in 2022, and additional entries that continued into the years following. Each version tried to recapture something from the original. Each one partially succeeded, each one partially failed. The mythology expanded, contradicted itself, collapsed, and expanded again. Leatherface gained a name, lost it, gained a backstory, lost it, gained family members, lost them. But through all of it, three things remained constant: a large figure, a running chainsaw, a mask made from human skin. Those three elements proved impossible to dilute regardless of how many sequels surrounded them. They came from a real place, from a real man, from a farmhouse in Wisconsin where something happened that the investigators who walked through it spent the rest of their lives trying to leave behind. Leatherface entered the vocabulary of American horror and never left. The template he established in 1974 became the structural blueprint for an entire genre: the silent killer, the rural setting, the final girl. The relentless pursuit with no logic behind it except continuation. Michael Myers followed. Jason Voorhees followed. The slasher genre that dominated American cinema through the late 1970s and the entirety of the 1980s traces a direct line back to that Texas farmhouse. And that Texas farmhouse traces a direct line back to Plainfield, Wisconsin. And Plainfield, Wisconsin traces a direct line back to one man in one deteriorating house, wearing a face that did not belong to him. What is strange, when you sit with all of it, is how far the ripple traveled from such a small point of origin. A single farmhouse, a single county in Wisconsin, a man that most of his neighbors described as harmless. From that one place, a genre was born. Dozens of films, hundreds of millions of dollars, decades of nightmares in theaters across the world. And at the center of all of it, invisible to most of the people consuming it, the ghost of a real case that most of them had never heard of. That is the reach of Ed Gein, not the body count, not the murders, but the way his story seeped into the culture silently and became the foundation under things people thought were pure fiction. Now we are back where this started. Leatherface is fictional. The Sawyer family never existed. There was no isolated Texas property where travelers disappeared. Tobe Hooper built most of what you see on that screen from imagination and craft, and a budget that should not have been capable of producing anything lasting. But the darkness that made it possible to imagine such a thing, that was real. A quiet man, a small town, a farm at the edge of a road that nobody drove more than they had to. And inside that farm, behind walls that looked ordinary from the outside, evidence of something so far beyond the expected range of human behavior that investigators struggled to process it even after they had seen it with their own eyes. Ed Gein never held a chainsaw. He never chased anyone across a burning field. He was not loud or fast or physically terrifying to look at. He was the version of this story that unfolded in complete silence over years, in a place where no one was watching. But the thing that made him so difficult to understand, the thing that Tobe Hooper reached into and pulled out when he was building Leatherface, was not the masks, not the grave robberies, not the objects he made from human remains. It was the absence at the center of him, a person who had been shaped entirely by someone else's hands, who had never been allowed to become anything on his own terms, and who spent decades in the dark trying to assemble a self from whatever he could find. Leatherface wears different masks because he has no face of his own. Ed Gein wore masks because the same was true of him. That is the real connection between these two stories. Not Texas, not Wisconsin, not chainsaws or farmhouses or the summer heat. The unbearable, quietly horrifying condition of a person who does not know who they are, and the lengths that emptiness is capable of driving someone to fill itself. The story of Leatherface leaves you with something that does not fully resolve. The most terrifying characters in horror do not come from nowhere. They come from somewhere specific, from real failures, from real darkness, from people who existed in the same world as everyone else, and somehow ended up somewhere completely unreachable. Ed Gein was not a monster the way movies show monsters. He was a man that a specific life made into something that should not have been possible. And the horror of that is not in what he did inside that farmhouse. It is in how long it took anyone to notice, and in the fact that by the time anyone did, years had passed, seasons had turned, children who had played in his yard had grown up and moved away. The town had continued around him like water around a stone, completely unaware of what was sitting at its center. Leatherface inherited that quality. Strip away everything cinematic about him, and what remains is the same question. How close is this? And does it look anything like what we expect? If you enjoyed this documentary, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you do not miss what comes next. And if you have not yet watched the full story of Ed Gein himself, the real man behind the mask, that video is waiting for you right here. Watch it next, because now that you know how his story became Leatherface, the original case will hit differently. And let me know in the comments. Should this channel keep going deeper into the real stories behind the horror characters everyone thinks they know? Because there are more of them. More disturbing inspirations. More quiet men in ordinary-looking places. More stories hiding behind the fiction. I will see you in the next one.